Hey everybody, Marcus here. So one of the issues that has not been explored within the MGTOW community, other than in passing comments, is the issue of leaving a legacy. Now, I'm not referring to a legacy that will remain due to MGTOW as a group, but to the legacies that each individual men going their way intend to leave. So every person desires for their life to have meaning, a purpose, something that gives you a justification for your own existence. The existential writer Albert Camus asks in the myth of Sisyphus, "What reason do I have not to kill myself?" It's this very question that comes from the positive philosophical project to overcome nihilism. I mean, if you're a Christian, the answer is quite simple. God forbids it, and if I kill myself, I'll go straight to hell. For an atheist, however, this answer doesn't really work. So one can take two approaches in dealing with this question. The first, and sadly the most common approach, is the equivalent of sticking your head in the sand and pretend the question is a non-question. I consider half-assed answers such as because life is good, or people would be sad if I died, or why would you kill yourself? I mean, these and similar answers I would stick in this category of classifying it as a non-question. The second approach to answering the question of suicide is to actually attempt to find some reason. Finding meaning or purpose to one's life to such an answer is kind of the exploration. It is a justification of your existence to yourself, after all. Having this justification is important because it can dramatically change the tone of your existential experience. If your sole reason to stay alive is a fear of death, then you're condemning yourself to a painful existence. And that's all it'll really be, just existence. Hollow, cruel, pointless, depressing existence. When you think about it, slaving at a job to feed yourself, experiencing a plethora of these unpleasant emotions we have, sleep deprivation from time to time, sickness, betrayal, disappointment, stress. I mean, having to endure all these things is a major hassle. It better have a point to it. You could opt for a hedonistic justification. You could say to yourself that there are so many pleasures in life that they outweigh the displeasures. And sure, that's a great answer for someone who wishes to abdicate their humanity and make themselves an honorary animal. I mean, the middle point between a monkey and a man. I mean, to the rest of us, this answer really just won't do. Leaving a legacy, however, gives meaning. It gives you a purpose. It makes your life a project. Now, you can ask yourself, why the hell should I want to leave a legacy? I mean, you leave a legacy in defiance. In defiance of the perceived absurdity of life, as Camus indicates. In defiance of the hubris of man in believing that we have it all figured out. That our science has given us all the answers, and it's just a bunch of spinning atoms and nothing more. See, the sheer audacity of man to succumb to its own hypocrisy in branding our ancestors savages while thinking of ourselves as enlightened, I mean, it's staggering. Who will be the savage in 1,000 years when our progeny reflect on this time? Who? Well, us, today, that's who. Every period in time thinks itself correct, like a petulant child sired by times past, gazing back at their parents like some backward know-nothings. This is what you are in defiance of. You leave a legacy to spite the present, honor the past, and ensure a future in hopes that one day man will overcome itself. It's one big fuck you to human weakness. Many men look upon children as their legacy. This, I believe, is the orthodox, out-of-the-box, go-to answer I suspect people default to without giving it really a second thought. It's a cruise control response to the issue of one's legacy, and personally, I find it wholly unsatisfying. The notion of one's immortality has been associated with children, however. I'll put forward a simple argument that I hope presents a slightly better answer. Now, to leave a legacy, or in other words, immortalize oneself as far as anything can truly be immortalized within the human sphere, implies that a portion of your identity or ego survives death. Children, however, possess their own identity, as each child is their own being, and as such, your ego, if in any part is mirrored within the child, will nonetheless be twisted sufficiently that even while you're still alive, you might not see yourself in your child. Well, of course, you will see yourself in your child, well, any child for that matter, to the extent that you were a child once yourself, and recognize that aspect. But it's not truly your ego you're seeing, but a projection of your conscious mind on someone on a path that you have already been on. So it's not you that you see, it's the path that you see in the child. As to leaving behind your genetic material, well, if you subscribe to a materialist metaphysics, then perhaps you can only remain through leaving behind material. If this, however, is your intention, then you're better off having your body frozen or donated to science. Your skeleton can adorn a 5th grade science class somewhere for a long time past your death. Well, however, if you subscribe to a materialist metaphysics, there's another reason why leaving behind your genetic material is not really much good in terms of immortalizing yourself. I mean, the human genome is finite. This means that it is possible, well, though statistically small, that the genetic makeup of a child of yours could come into existence in the child of different people. So, also, your descendants may not procreate and your line ends anyways. So, most strikingly, however, is that it's not really much of a legacy if you think about it. Is the pinnacle of your achievement the mere enactment of a biological function you were born with? Is your intention to claim credit for any greatness you hope your children to achieve? I mean, if children is your legacy, then for the love of God, go big. I mean, start donating sperm across the world as often as possible. Why leave 1 or 2 kids behind? We can have hundreds, if not thousands of them through the sperm bank system. Well, another argument to the general insignificance of children as a legacy, well, it kind of goes as follows. If your son is your legacy, then you are your father's legacy. If your grandson is also your legacy, and every descendant down the line, then your son is also the legacy of your father, grandfather, and every ancestor before them. Your son then becomes a shared legacy, with your part being one in however many thousands led up to him. Let's say you worked construction, let's say you worked on the Empire State Building alongside with 999 other men. Would you then truly call the Empire State Building your legacy? Well, but if your child is only your legacy and not your father's and so on, then your legacy dies with your son. I mean, considering latent genes and the delusion of them with the bloodline of the mother, you really are shooting pretty low for sinking your purpose into genetics. Each generation further dilutes your genetic material as your posterity breed with different lines, so within a few generations there's little left of you anyways. Perhaps you think a child is a legacy because if raised correctly, will be a great and positive force in the world. See, this argument has been considered by Socrates in several of the Platonic dialogues under the question, can virtue be taught? Now, the argument kind of goes as follows. If virtue can be taught, then surely there are teachers of virtue. Those teachers of virtue would necessarily need to know what virtue is. A virtuous person surely knows what virtue is, so a virtuous person should be able to teach it. Now, what Socrates does next is point out an interesting phenomenon. There have been very affluent, virtuous men who ended up with miserable sons. Surely, a man of virtue and means has all the conditions necessary to teach virtue to the child themselves, or be able to afford to hire a virtuous person to teach their child for them. So how do these virtuous affluent men end up with shitty sons? How do courageous men end up with cowards for progeny, or just men with tyrants for progeny? So sinking your hopes that you'll raise a virtuous child kind of presupposes that child is made of the stuff to begin with. So is it really you or chance that leads to a virtuous child? What about the memory of you? So donating sperm won't have you remembered. Is this what you call a legacy then, being remembered? This also yields little hope where children are concerned. For at the most, it'll only be your grandchildren who will have any living memory associated with you. The memory of you fades into oblivion with them. There is, however, a better way to secure one's memory than through children, and that is to become discoverable. To be discoverable, your name and your existence must be the last answer to a chain of questions. Who invented the TV? Where did the Pythagorean come from? Questions like that ultimately can place you as the answer and the cause of the question itself. So this is a vastly superior way of securing a memory of you. The scope of the people who are potentially asking this question is the reach of your legacy. Anyone who owns a TV or knows of TV is someone who is affected by a legacy, and as such a candidate to discover its efficient cause. But to be discoverable as an efficient cause to something, one actually needs to be an efficient cause to something. Though having a child makes you discoverable through the questioning of a family tree, your name is not the last name answered. The question continues down as far back as can be traced, so you're merely one stepping stone. So in my opinion, children are not really a meaningful trigger for discoverability. However, even the discoverability of your name is not your legacy, but merely a consequence of it. No. Your legacy is the perpetual impact on people's lives your existence continues to have past your death. Now, it's all well and good to talk about these massive legacies left behind by Charles Jenkins, Walt Disney, Nikola Tesla, Einstein, and so forth. But I think we all know that very few of us will ever leave such a legacy. What is within the grasp of virtually every MGTOW, however, is a single act of magnificence. Now, those who are not inclined to invent stuff or generate ideas, create any art, or for that matter produce any tangible artifacts that would lead to a legacy, still generate some level of wealth throughout their life. You may lead a life of just playing video games, working a full-time job, and saving money for a rainy day. Well, what happens with that money when you get to old age? See, I'm not talking about millions, but say even the selling cost of your house, if you have one, $200,000 to $400,000. If you have children, you may choose to leave these things to them, or you may not for whatever reason. Actually, I can give you a good reason not to leave inheritance to your children. See, fighting over inheritance can destroy families. It turns brother against brother, mother against son. This has happened in my family, and I've seen it happen in other families as well. I'm sure you've seen it too. If your children resent you for not leaving them an inheritance, then I think that pretty much tells you all you need to know about them deserving it in the first place. Entitled children should not be obliged. So if you're not going to give it to them, what happens to this wealth when you're near death? See, a MGTOW man, one who has abstained from skirt-chasing expenditures such as fancy cars, designer clothes, and so forth, may very well find themselves with a nest egg that at the end of his years he finds little use for. The notion that you will spend your retirement years traveling and blowing money left and right on living is most likely never going to happen. See, your energy levels will be lower, your intent at the point of spending money that you saved will differ from your original intent when you had put that money away 20 years prior, and your health might act against you. Also, I suspect that with the ever-encroaching sense of one's mortality, the idea of fulfilling some sensual desire will give way to a desire to give meaning to your life, and therefore a desire to leave a legacy. See, I believe there's this fallacious assumption that people carry throughout their lives when it comes to old age. A contradiction that I never really hear pointed out. See, we say that the older you get, the more set in your ways you become. See, we observe this constantly. Now, a life spent living modestly and a habit of saving reinforced through decades of repetition will not disappear as soon as you hit retirement. You will continue to live out the same habits and possibly acquire a much stronger sense of urgency in finding purpose, as you no longer have a job that has been fueling some of that purpose in your life. Yet when some people talk about retirement, what they will be doing when they retire, they are describing a completely different person than the one that is needed to enable that retirement. They describe a retired globe-trotting spendthrift but live the life of a minimalist homebody. Now, if you are a minimalist homebody leading up to old age, you will most likely be a minimalist homebody in old age. So now, you're left with an unspent nest egg, a creeping sense of your own mortality, plenty of free time, and little to no external forces driving purpose in your life. This is where that single act of magnificence comes in. See, magnificence was first distinguished from magnanimity by Plato and later elaborated on by Aristotle. See, magnificence is a virtue, and probably the least practiced virtue in the world because it usually requires money to enact. See, a magnificent act is usually described as the allocation of private funds to some public works benefiting the community as a whole. This could be as lavish as building a hospital to as modest as commissioning a statue to be placed in a public park. In either case, you need money. Now, this act of magnificence, if nothing else you have achieved in life, can be your legacy. See, I'm not suggesting donating to charity, as there's nothing of oneself in how such money would be spent, most likely on administrative overhead. No. I suggest some concrete act. Build that hospital if you have the funds. Commission a statue or some wondrous work of beauty and set it in a park somewhere, or build a park somewhere to add beauty to a concrete jungle. Why not open a school on a subject that you love that isn't being taught in any other school? Or you could donate a library to an elementary school and have it named after you. Remember, you're enacting an act of magnificence, not starting a business. Enact something that makes you discoverable, something that puts your name as the answer to a question, and think in terms of your act elevating the human condition. Hell, if there is a MGTOWN project somewhere in the works by then, use your nest egg to make that place a better place. Perhaps your act of magnificence can be setting up a bunch of solar panels that make the houses in MGTOWN self-sustaining. See, this sort of legacy is completely within reach of most MGTOW, and I see it as an inspiring goal to work towards, a goal worth working and saving for, even though you don't know what the object of your act is yet. See, magnificence is a crowning virtue according to Aristotle, and it's most certainly aligned with virtus, as I explained in an earlier video, so manliness, as the Romans called it. See, magnificence acts are respected and loved by all who witness them. Not even a cynic can argue with such an act. I mean, true, they can argue with the object of the act, but not with the act itself. You can't take money to the grave, but you can leave a legacy with it. So, let me know what you plan on doing with your nest egg, because I think you get the idea of what I plan on doing with mine. So, thanks for listening. Cheers.